Tableau. The journey to Shymkent was a passage through the heart of Kazakhstan's evolving identity. The modern feel of Astana collided with the ancient culture of Shymkent. As the plane touched down through endless golden plains dotted with grazing livestock, a sense of anticipation grew. This was not Astana, but a vastly different culture and land. It was windy as I disembarked the plane, and the air carried a mix of earthy warm. When I finally arrived to my hotel, Shymkent revealed itself as a kaleidoscope of contrasts. It was bustling and tranquil, yet gritty and worn down. The streets were alive with motion, but it did feel a little incomplete. Perhaps the city felt like a crossroad of time and culture. Towering Soviet-era apartment blocks loomed over mosques, mixed in with shopping centers that you would think would give a modern feel, but really did not. At least, not in the way that modern Astana did. The smell of the city, however, was quite pleasant. The aroma of grilled meat, likely horse, wafted through the air. Everywhere there was an undercurrent of the past, perhaps due to the mingling of its diverse inhabitants Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Russians, and more, many of which likely lived there before the ideas of countries meant much to them. Shymkent felt raw and authentic, unapologetically itself. A city with deep roots in history, eyes set firmly on the horizons, but not quite there yet. As I settled into my hotel in Shymkent, the upscale Hilton Hotel, which could be had for $30, I mentioned my interest in history to the receptionist. With a casual manner, I inquired about Otrar, the ancient city which I had read so much about. Her face went blank in confusion, as though the name were unfamiliar. Otrar? She repeated, as I feared I had spoken the name incorrectly. I'm not sure. Her answer was echoed later by the locals I questioned. Some shrugged, and most laughed, likely due to my poor translation app. The city of Otrar had seemed to be forgotten. This discovery baffled me. How could a city so significant to the history of Central Asia, a 4th century city tied to the Mongol conquest and the Silk Road, fade so completely from local awareness? I wondered if the ruins were truly forgotten, or if Otrar was even worth going to. However, my curiosity grew after checking online and scouring the internet. I once again questioned the hotel. Finally, the front desk seemed to have some sort of idea of the place and charged me $60 to call a cab. An old Kazakh man picked me up. Without a word of English, he tried to verify the address over and over again. Then we left for the 2-hour journey. The journey to Otrar was a voyage into desolation, where the horizons stretched endlessly, blurring the line between the earth and sky. The car's engine hummed steadily as we left the outskirts of Shymkent and plunged into a vast expanse of emptiness. Fields of dry grass rolled endlessly in every direction, their golden hues shimmering under the relentless sun. Every so often we passed a small cluster of shrubbery or weathered rocks, but there was little else to break the monotony of the land. An hour passed, and the road, a little more than a dirt track by then, became harder to follow. My driver seemed confused. At one point we came to a complete stop, and he climbed out to scan the landscape. It was clear we were lost. There was no signage, and not really a village in sight, only the whispering wind and the distant silhouettes of camels. Eventually we stumbled upon a small village of maybe 10 houses or so. The driver nodded with a faint smile, probably relief, as we resumed our journey. I couldn't shake the feeling of sheer isolation. If anything happened out here, we were screwed. The ruins of Otrar finally came into view. A giant horse statue shimmered in the desert haze. The ticket booth was marked by an unassuming gate. A small booth stood at its entrance. A woman emerged as we pulled up, her weathered face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat. She handed us a small paper ticket in exchange for 40 cents, a laughably small sum for access to remnants of a 4th century city, which had once shaped the course of history itself. The transaction felt surreal, as though the grandeur of the tragedy of Otrar had been reduced to mere pocket change. As we stepped through the gate, it became clear that we were utterly alone. The vast expanse of the ruins stretched out under the unrelenting desert sun. It was silent except for the dry wind that swept across the cracked earth. The heat was oppressive, 40 degrees Celsius, or near 100 degrees Fahrenheit, with no trees or shelter in sight. The sun burned overhead, turning the air into a shimmering mirage. The silence of the place was almost eerie, as if the ruins themselves were holding their breath, their broken walls and empty streets whispering stories of the lives that had once thrived there. It was humbling and haunting, standing there alone in the heart of this forgotten city, surrounded by nothing but the weight of history and the desert's unyielding heat. At this point, I had traveled to many different countries, but this was the first trip I had taken where the driver actually came out to see the sights with me. About 10 minutes into the journey, my driver finally paused. He excitedly muttered something in Kazakh about the Mongols and the ancient city. I presume, at least, all I could understand was him repeating, Genghis Khan, Genghis Khan. For the first time, it seemed he understood the weight of the history beneath our feet. A place once alive with trade, culture, and tragedy, now silent and forgotten. It's a solemn feeling in Otrar. Not much remains other than the story of this place. Otrar's history is inseparable with one of the most famously brutal episodes of the Mongol conquest. In 1218, Genghis Khan, then expanding his vast empire across Central Asia, sent a caravan of 500 merchants to Otrar. He did this to establish trade relations with the controlling empire of Otrar. The governor of Otrar, suspicious of the caravan's intentions and reportedly driven by greed, accused the merchants of espionage. Acting on his accusations, he seized the goods and executed the merchants, an act of treachery that would seal Otrar's fate. Enraged by the betrayal, Genghis Khan demanded justice, but his demands were ignored, and a subsequent Mongol envoy was also executed. This insult to the Mongols' authority provoked Genghis Khan to unleash his wrath. In 1219, the Mongol army began its campaign against the insulting empire, with Otrar as one of its primary targets. The siege of Otrar lasted for 5 grueling months. The leaders of Otrar fortified the city and resisted fiercely, but the Mongols, master of siege warfare, eventually breached the walls. The city fell in early 1220, and the Mongols executed much of the population, leaving the once thriving Silk Road's hub in ruins. The leader who had insulted Khan himself was captured and killed in a manner fitting of Genghis Khan. The story goes that he poured molten silver down his eyes and ears as his execution. I stand in the land where such chaos took place, and that was the end of Otrar, or so they thought. After its catastrophic fall during the Mongol invasion, Otrar did experience a gradual revival, spurred by its location along the Silk Road. Despite its decimation, the city's position once made it thrive again. Over the following centuries, merchants and settlers did return. They brought back markets. They brought back residential quarters. Scholars once again made their way to the city, contributing to its slow transformation to a modest yet vibrant settlement. However, this revival was short-lived. As the Silk Road declined and newer trade routes emerged, Otrar ultimately was eclipsed by other cities. By the 16th century, it had fallen into obscurity, leaving behind the ruins that now silently narrate its storied history. Standing amid the sparse ruins of Otrar, I was struck by the forgotten land. What remains seems so small, so insignificant against the vastness of its history. A city once alive with the hum of trade and culture, now reduced to scattered fragments, all seen for 40 cents.